outside her property. Ghetto trash. Vivian Ashford's voice, sharp and piercing like a fingernail dragged across a chalkboard, lashed through the peaceful afternoon air. This is a private street for residents only. Crackhead. The sound of a skull striking pavement rang out with shocking force in the quiet cul-de-sac. Amara, Sinclair cried out as a constellation of pain exploded behind her eyes, the moment her head rebounded against the unyielding asphalt. Vivian stood over her, fingers still tangled in the glorious black curls she had just used to yank Amara upward. A triumphant, hate-filled grimace twisted her face. You think you can come here and do whatever you want? My husband is a police officer. He'll be here any minute to haul you off to jail, where you belong. Vivian had no idea that the woman she had just assaulted, whose blood now stained the emerald silk of her dress, was the daughter of the state's most powerful law enforcement official. What happens when a racist bully with a police officer husband complex attacks the daughter of the most powerful lawman in the state? From what angle do you see this story? Like and subscribe to watch justice delivered not as mere punishment, but as a sledgehammer. The sun hung as a flawless molten disk in the vast cerulean sky, beating down upon the immaculate perfection of Willow Creek Estates. It was a neighborhood designed for tranquility, a place where the synchronized hiss of sprinkler systems formed the loudest sound of the day, and the most significant community drama was a passive-aggressive note left on a recycling bin set out too early. Every house stood as a monument to upper-middle-class aspiration. Muted earth-tone paint, three-car garages housing pristine SUVs, and lawns so uniformly green they looked computer-rendered. Willow Creek was a fortress of designed monotony, priced to keep the messy, unpredictable elements of the world at a comfortable, sanitized distance. Into this airtight bubble of suburban conformity arrived Amara Sinclair, not with a whisper, but with the deep, throaty roar of a classic 1968 Ford Mustang, its Highland green paint gleaming like a polished jewel. The car was the first offense. It was too loud, too classic, too full of personality for a street of sensible leased German sedans. It stopped in front of the only house on the cul-de-sac that had recently sold, a charming two-story brick colonial, updated with quiet good taste. Then the driver's door opened. A long, toned leg appeared, shod in a strappy gold sandal, followed by the rest of Amara Sinclair. The sun seemed to find her, reflecting the vibrant, impossible hue of her dress, a simple emerald silk piece that wrapped her figure like a second skin. It was a bold, unapologetic splash of living color in a world of beige and dusty gray. Amara was a living sculpture, a woman of such captivating beauty that she seemed momentarily to bend the light around her. Her skin held the warm, rich tone of fine coffee. Her cascade of voluminous black curls stood in sharp contrast to the severe blonde cuts of the neighborhood. She was tall, carried herself with majestic ease, and possessed an athletic yet voluptuously feminine figure, with a high, generous bust that the delicate thin straps of her dress enhanced with carefree confidence. She stood for a moment with the new keys in her hand, gazing at her new home with a serene, unreadable expression. She was not simply moving in, across the street, peering through the immaculate slats of her plantation shutters. Vivian Ashford felt a familiar, unpleasant tightness in her chest. Vivian, a woman of 38 whose life was a carefully curated performance of suburban success, considered herself the undisputed queen of this cul-de-sac. She was the chair of the Homeowners Association Architectural Review Committee, the organizer of the annual 4th of July block party, and the self-appointed enforcer of the neighborhood's unwritten, yet strictly imposed social code, Every fiber of her being, honed by years of judging and excluding, screamed that the woman in the emerald dress was a fundamental error in the code. "Garrett, come here," she called in a low, venomous voice, never taking her eyes from the scene. Her husband, Officer Garrett Ashford, a man whose lean, muscular academy figure had thickened into the imposing bulk of a 10-year veteran, entered the room in his 40s. He still carried the arrogance of a man accustomed to unquestioned authority. He wore his off-duty uniform, khaki shorts and a tight polo that strained across his chest, embroidered with the logo of a local sports bar. "What's the emergency, Viv? The kid from the Gables left his stroller on the sidewalk again?" "Worse," Brenda replied, her voice steeped in pure contempt that almost felt physical. "Look." She jerked her chin. Garrett followed her gaze. He saw the Mustang. He saw the professional long-haul moving truck, not some cheap rental. Then he saw Amara. A low, appreciative whistle escaped his lips. "Well now, looks like property values are about to climb a whole lot higher." Vivian shot him a look that could have curdled milk. "Don't be disgusting, Garrett. That's the problem. She's moving into the old Davenport place." Garrett's fleeting admiration instantly hardened into suspicion. His mind, shaped by a decade of policing a city sharply divided by race and class, began its automatic, cynical calculation. In that house, that place sold for more than $1 million. How the hell had she managed it? He did not see a successful professional. He saw a red flag, an anomaly that demanded a negative explanation. Lottery winner. Insurance settlement. Maybe some athlete's girlfriend. The idea that she might have earned it herself was a foreign concept, a possibility so remote, he dismissed it at once. "That's what I intend to find out," Vivian said with disdain, a cruel half-smile on her lips. "This is a quiet neighborhood, Garrett, for respectable families, for doctors, lawyers, executives, not for that." The unspoken word hung between them, dense and poisonous, black. Amara, blissfully unaware of the toxic judgment being leveled from the house across the street, walked up the flagstone path to her new front door. The lock turned smoothly. As she opened it, she cast one last glance over her shoulder at her new domain. Her eyes swept the quiet street, the identical immaculate houses, the peaceful, sterile facade of Willow Creek. For a fleeting instant, her gaze rested on the closed window of the house opposite. She could not see the figures behind the glass, but she could feel them. She could feel the weight of their scrutiny. A lifetime of experience had given her an innate instinct for it, the sensation of being watched, evaluated, and found wanting. A small, almost imperceptible sigh escaped her lips. She had hoped this time would be different, that she might find a measure of peace. Yet as she crossed the threshold into the cool, empty expanse of her new home, a familiar sense of resignation and weariness washed over her. It seemed the battle had already begun. She had only just arrived, and the first stone had already been cast. The moving truck was gone, leaving only the faintest impression of its weight on the pristine asphalt. Amara's new life began to take shape. Boxes were unpacked methodically. An elegant collection of modern furniture found its place. The house gradually filled with the personality of its new owner, sophisticated, vibrant, and marked by a serene, self-assured energy. Amara was in her front garden, kneeling on a foam pad beneath the warm sun, wearing simple linen shorts and a sleeveless top, her glorious hair gathered in a silk scarf. Gardening gloves protected her hands as she carefully worked compost into a bed of tired-looking rose bushes the previous owners had neglected. The air smelled of freshly turned earth and flowering gardenias, For a brief happy moment, peace reigned. Then a shadow fell over her. "Everything all right out here?" Amara looked up. A woman stood at the edge of her garden, arms crossed, wearing a smile as bright and artificial as her chemically whitened teeth. It was Vivian Ashford, dressed in the unofficial uniform of Willow Creek's alpha female. Expensive yoga pants, an immaculate white tennis shirt, and gleaming white sneakers that had clearly never touched a real trail. "I'm Vivian Ashford from across the street," she said in a cheerful melody that clashed with the cold, appraising look in her eyes. "I'm on board of the Homeowners Association. I've been so busy I haven't had a chance to swing by and officially welcome you to the neighborhood." Amara slowly removed her muddy gloves and rose, brushing soil from her knees. She stood several inches taller than Vivian, a detail that flickered momentarily as irritation in her new neighbor's eyes. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Vivian. I'm Amara Sinclair." She offered a kind, genuine smile. "It's a beautiful neighborhood. You can tell everyone takes pride in it." "Of course we do," Vivian replied, not looking at Amara, but making a rapid inventory of the house and garden. "In Willow Creek, we maintain very high standards. That's what keeps our property values stable, you know." The implication landed with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "And you are a potential liability." Amara's smile never wavered. "I understand. I'm looking forward to bringing these poor roses back to life." Vivian let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like a startled bird. "Honey, don't waste your time. That's a lost cause. You'll want the whole thing ripped out and redone professionally. We all use evergreen designs. They're not cheap, but they understand the aesthetic we're trying to maintain." She pronounced the word aesthetic as though it were a sacred principle Amara, in her simple gardening clothes, could never grasp. "I'll keep that in mind," Amara answered, her tone still perfectly serene. "But I've always enjoyed getting my hands dirty." "Sure," Vivian drawled the word as if it were a foreign concept. Her gaze finally settled on Amara, and her false smile tightened. "So, Sinclair, are you married? We're a very family-oriented community." The question was a probe, a small scalpel searching for vulnerability. "I'm not married," Amara replied softly, offering nothing more. She understood the game. Vivian was trying to place her within a recognizable social hierarchy, and a single woman of color, with $1 million home, broke every established rule. Vivian's expression soured. Not married. That made the money even more mysterious, more suspicious. "I see," she whispered, though her tone held nothing of understanding. "Well, my husband Garrett is a police officer, a sergeant, highly respected in the department." She puffed her chest slightly, as if the borrowed authority of her husband's badge were a shield she could raise against this anomaly. "That must be a demanding job," Amara said. The simple, courteous reply was a wonderfully serene deflection. She had no intention of laying her life open to this woman's critical inspection. The unbroken calm was beginning to infuriate Vivian. She had come expecting someone she could condescend to or intimidate easily, someone who would grow defensive or too eager to please. Amara was neither. She simply owned herself. It was like throwing stones at a mountain. "Well," Vivian said, her cheerful facade finally cracking. Her voice took on a harder, more professional edge. "The main reason I came was to drop off the Homeowners Association welcome packet." She thrust a thick, glossy folder into Amara's hands. "It contains all the covenants and restrictions, the placement rules for trash and recycling bins, the approved paint colors, and the noise ordinances. We're very strict about noise, especially loud music or parties. This is a quiet, family neighborhood." Every word was a warning. Every rule was a potential weapon. "Thank you, Vivian," I'll be sure to read it carefully, Amara said, accepting the folder. You do that, Vivian replied, turning to leave. She took 2 steps, stopped, and looked back over her shoulder, directing her gaze at the classic Mustang parked in the driveway. That car of yours, it's a little loud, don't you think? The covenants have a section on vehicle noise, too. We don't want any nuisances. Amara's composure remained flawless. She simply stood there, holding the folder, her face a mask of serene neutrality. She did not take the bait. Frustrated by the lack of a satisfying reaction, Vivian played her final card. Anyway, welcome to Willow Creek, she said, with words that sounded more like a territorial threat than a genuine greeting. I hope you'll fit in. She strode down the street, her ponytail swinging with agitated, furious rhythm. Amara watched her go. She looked at the welcome packet in her hands, a Trojan horse filled with rules designed to be used against her. Then she looked at the weary rose bushes, their heads bowed, as if defeated. With a deep sigh, she set the packet aside on the porch railing, took up the trowel, and drove it once more into the rich, dark earth. The welcome had been given. It was a declaration of war disguised as a neighborly greeting, and Amara understood with a certainty that settled into her blood that this was only the beginning. The thorns were out, and they pointed directly at her. The days that followed, Vivian's welcome became a campaign of escalating low-level warfare. It was a battle fought not with open declarations, but with the petty, insidious tactics of a bully who believed herself untouchable. Vivian Ashford was the strategist. Her husband, Officer Garrett Ashford, was the weapon. He used the authority of his badge and the intimidating presence of his patrol car to wage a silent war of nerves against Amara, a campaign designed to make her feel uncomfortable, watched, and unsafe in her own home. It began subtly. One evening, while Amara sat in her living room reading a book, a blinding light suddenly flooded the room, extinguishing the soft glow of her lamp. She looked up, startled, and saw Garrett's patrol car parked directly opposite. The powerful roof-mounted spotlight aimed straight at her window. It remained there for a full minute, a piercing, dazzling glare, before switching off. The patrol car stayed parked for another hour, a silent, oversized beast in the darkness, before finally driving away. No siren, no emergency, only the quiet, threatening declaration, I am watching you. The next day, it was the trash bins. The Homeowners Association rules, as Vivian had so helpfully pointed out, dictated that bins could be placed at the curb no earlier than a specific evening hour before collection. As Amara wheeled the bins to the end of her driveway, Garrett's patrol car stopped at the corner. The moment she turned her back, he arrived, stepped out, and affixed a bright orange violation sticker to the container. He spoke not a word, offered no warning, simply marked her property and left. Another small act of power designed to undermine her peace. The harassment was constant, a dripping faucet of intimidation. He would park his patrol car several houses away and sit for hours during his shift, ostensibly watching the neighborhood, yet always with a clear view of her house. When she left in her Mustang, he often pulled out and followed her for a few blocks before turning away, reminding her that he could run her plates, stop her, and disrupt her life whenever he chose. He never used his lights. He never broke the law, but the message was as clear as the badge on his chest. He was the law in Willow Creek, and she was the designated target. Amara documented everything with the discreet precision of an experienced legal analyst, a skill honed by her education and training. She noted the hours, the dates, and the specific actions in a secure digital file on her laptop. The spotlight incident, the trash bin violation, the slow, deliberate patrols past her house, the license plate of his patrol car, his badge number, which she had recorded on the first day. She logged it all without emotion, compiling a dossier of harassment as methodical as it was damning. She knew that reacting emotionally was exactly what they wanted. They wanted her to scream, to complain, to give them a reason to escalate. She gave them nothing. Her patience was a weapon, and she wielded it with mastery. One afternoon, Amara was on a video call in her home office, a beautiful, light-filled room overlooking the front garden. She was speaking with a colleague from a pro bono legal aid clinic where she volunteered, discussing strategy for an upcoming housing discrimination case. Suddenly, the guttural roar of a powerful engine shattered the quiet. She looked out the window and saw Garrett Ashford, this time off duty, ostentatiously revving the engine of his massive truck, which he had parked in the street directly in front of her driveway, blocking her exit. The truck was a caricature of aggressive masculinity: lifted suspension, enormous tires, a string of vulgar stickers on the tailgate. He let the engine roar for half a minute, the vibration traveling through the windows of Amara's office, before shutting it off. Then he climbed out with a self-satisfied smile and began unloading bags of mulch from the bed, making a great show of physical effort while ensuring the truck remained immovable. "I'm sorry, David," Amara said into her headset, her voice calm and steady despite the deliberate provocation. "I have a small neighborhood issue. May I call you back?" She hung up, rose, and walked to the door. She did not storm out in anger. She simply opened the door and stood in the entrance with her arms crossed, watching him. Garrett caught sight of her from the corner of his eye. He ignored her for several minutes, hoisting another bag of mulch onto his shoulder and carrying it into his own yard. Finally, after savoring the silence and her attention for as long as he could, he turned toward her. "Got a problem?" he asked, in a tone that mixed feigned innocence with belligerence. "You're blocking my driveway, Officer Ashford," Amara said simply. Her voice was not accusatory. It was a statement of fact. Garrett wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Am I? Oh, damn. I'm so sorry. This truck's so big, you know. Hard to park. I'll only be a few more minutes. Gotta get this mulch down before it rains." He pointed at the clear, cloudless blue sky. "I have an appointment I need to get to," Amara said, with unshakable patience. "I need you to move your vehicle right now." The direct, serene command seemed to throw him. He was accustomed to people shrinking in fear or shouting. He did not know how to handle this quiet, inflexible authority. His own authority rested on a uniform and a gun. Hers seemed to come from within. His face hardened. The pretense of neighborly ignorance vanished. "You know the problem with people like you?" he said, taking a threatening step onto her lawn. "You show up in a place like this and think you can start making demands. This is my neighborhood. I've lived here 10 years. You've been here a week. Learn where you are." Amara did not flinch. "My place is in my house, which I own, and your truck is on public property, illegally obstructing my access to that house. If you do not move it within the next minute, I will be forced to call a tow truck and then call your station and file a formal harassment complaint with your commanding officer. I'm sure he'd be very interested to know how his sergeants spend their free time." Garrett's face flushed crimson with rage. He was being challenged, not with emotion, but with logic and the law. His supposed domain. The threat of calling his captain was a direct hit. He knew that kind of complaint, even if it would likely be buried, would still be an unnecessary headache. He stared at her for a long moment of silence, jaw clenched. He wanted to say something more, something ugly, but her steady gaze held him. She was not afraid. That was the most exasperating part. Finally, muttering a low curse, he turned, climbed back into his truck, and started the engine with another repulsive roar, gunning it one last time as a final display of impotent aggression. Then, with a screech of his enormous tires, he pulled the truck forward 6 meters, clearing the driveway. Amara watched him leave. She offered no sarcastic thanks, no victorious smile. She simply turned, went back inside, and closed the door. The pattern was now crystal clear. The Ashfords did not see her as a neighbor. They saw her as a pest to be driven out. They used their power, both official and social, as a weapon. But they had made a fatal mistake. They assumed they were attacking the weak. They had no idea they were challenging a force so superior to their own that the contest was almost ridiculous. The badge-wearing bully had just been put on notice, and the consequences of his actions were beginning to accumulate like interest on a debt coming due. The fragile appearance of civility, already cracked and peeling, finally shattered on a sunny Saturday morning. The confrontation over the blocked driveway had been a turning point. Garrett Ashford's failure to intimidate Amara had only hardened his wife's resolve. Vivian's prejudice, once camouflaged in the passive-aggressive language of homeowners association rules and veiled insults, now shed its skin, revealing the raw, ugly racism that had lurked beneath. She was finished with subtlety. She wanted war. The casus belli was, as so often happens in suburban disputes, laughably trivial. A parking space, not a reserved space, not a driveway, but a simple, unmarked stretch of curb. Amara was hosting a small housewarming gathering for a few old friends from law school. 2 of her friends had already arrived and parked in her driveway. A third, arriving in a modest Honda Civic, found the driveway full and did what any normal person would do. They parked on the street directly in front of Amara's house. It was a perfectly legal and considerate act. To Vivian Ashford, however, it was an act of aggression. The stretch of curb in front of her house, and by extension the one across the street, belonged to her. It was her territory. Seeing an unfamiliar, slightly older car parked in her space, a car that was clearly visiting that woman, was an unforgivable intrusion. Vivienne stormed out of her front door like a wasp from a disturbed nest, dressed for battle in her weekend uniform of tennis skirt and visor. Her face was a mask of furious indignation. She did not go to Amara's door. She went straight to the Honda and began inspecting it as though it were alien wreckage that had crashed into her lawn. Amara and her friends were in the kitchen, laughing over a bottle of champagne, when she noticed the commotion through the window. "Excuse me a second, everyone," she said with a slight smile. "It seems the queen of the cul-de-sac requires an audience." She stepped outside and closed the door gently. The sun warmed her skin. She was wearing the emerald silk dress again, a deliberate choice, a piece of beautiful armor. She radiated a serene elegance that stood in stark contrast to Vivian's agitated energy. "Is there a problem, Vivian?" Amara asked in a quiet, calm voice. Vivian spun around, startled. "A problem? Yes, there's a problem. What is this?" she demanded, gesturing wildly at the Honda. "You can't let your guests park all over the street. This is a private street for residents." "This is a public street, Vivian," Amara corrected gently. "And my guest is parked legally. She's not blocking a driveway or a fire hydrant." "I don't care if it's legal," Vivian snapped, raising her voice. "It's a matter of consideration, of respect. We have a system here. People park in their driveways. We don't clutter the street with cars. It looks tacky. It upsets the whole neighborhood. It's one car, and it will be gone in a few hours," Amara said, refusing to enter an argument over so ridiculous a premise. "There's no need to make a scene." The word scene was like gasoline on the fire. It implied that Vivian was the unreasonable one, an idea her ego could not tolerate. "I'm not making a scene. I'm protecting the aesthetic of our community, something you clearly know nothing about," she shrieked, raking her eyes over Amara's stunning dress with open contempt. "We don't have parties all day long. We don't have traffic coming and going. This isn't the inner city." The dog whistle had become a foghorn at full volume. "My friends and I are having a quiet lunch," Amara said, the warmth leaving her voice and giving way to a cold, firm tone. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to get back to them. I'd appreciate it if you would stop harassing my guests and return to your own property." The direct order, the absolute absence of fear and deference, was more than Vivian could bear. This woman was supposed to feel intimidated. She was supposed to apologize. She was supposed to shrink before Vivian's neighborhood authority. Instead, she stood there, taller, calmer, and infinitely more powerful, treating Vivian like a spoiled child. "My property?" Vivian's voice cracked with fury. "This entire neighborhood is my concern. I've lived here 12 years. My husband is a police officer. We are respected here. And then you show up." She stepped closer. Her body vibrated with a rage that seemed to radiate from her in waves. The battle lines were drawn. The trivial argument over a strip of asphalt had become a proxy war for everything. Vivian felt threatened. Her status, her control, her racially homogeneous world. The battle for the curb was about to become all-out war, and Vivian was prepared to use any weapon necessary to win. She was finished with words. She was ready for violence, and in her mind, clouded by anger, she was completely convinced she was right, and that there would be no consequences for what she was about to do. The confrontation on the sunlit sidewalk escalated at terrifying speed. Vivian Ashford, driven by a toxic cocktail of racial animosity and frustrated entitlement, abandoned every pretense of neighborly concern. Her face flushed deep red, contorted into a mask of pure, undiluted hatred. The argument was no longer about a car. It was about the very existence of Amara in that space. "You with your flashy, noisy car and your attitude," Vivian spat, jabbing a trembling finger at Amara. "You think you can just walk in here and skip the rules? The rules are for everyone. The only one breaking them right now is you, Vivian," Amara said, lowering her voice to a deeper, quieter register that somehow proved more intimidating than a shout. "You're disturbing the peace. You're invading my guest's personal space. You're making a fool of yourself, honestly." That final statement, delivered with such calm, was the ultimate insult. Vivian's mind, unable to process a reality in which she was the villain, simply snapped. The carefully constructed facade of the respectable board member, the HOA enforcer, the perfect suburban wife, collapsed, revealing the intolerant bully who had been lurking beneath the surface all along. "Don't you dare talk down to me," she shrieked, her voice breaking with fury. "I know your type. You come into a nice neighborhood like this, probably with dirty money. We don't know who you are. We don't know where your money comes from. For all we know, you're a drug dealer or a high-class prostitute." The poisonous, absurd words floated in the pristine morning air. A neighbor across the street, Mr. Holloway, who had been trimming his hedges, stopped and stared, pruning shears frozen mid-cut. Amara's friend Tessa had opened the front door, her face a picture of shock and concern. Amara's expression remained unchanged, serene and unreadable. Yet a dangerous stillness settled over her. It was the stillness of deep, coiled power, of patience tested one too many times. "You need to leave," Amara said, her voice now cold and hard as polished stone. "Right now." "I'm not going anywhere," Vivian shouted, emboldened by her own venom. She was on a roll. The poison flowed freely. I'm protecting my investment. I'm protecting my family. I don't want people like you here. This is a good neighborhood, a family neighborhood for respectable white families. We don't want people like you devaluing properties and bringing in crime. Why don't you get in that piece of junk car and go back to the ghetto you came from? There it was. The venom had spilled. The racism, previously novelized by ramblings about aesthetics and standards, stood exposed before the entire cul-de-sac, raw, ugly, and unmistakable. Amara held her ground. She was a statue of dignity before a hurricane of hatred. She did not raise her voice. She did not trade insults. She simply looked at Vivian with a mixture of pity and contempt. "You're a sad, frightened woman, Vivian," Amara said quietly. "Your world is so small, and your heart is so full of hate. I almost feel sorry for you." Pity was the one thing Vivian could not endure. To be pitied by this woman, this interloper, this other, was total defeat. All the frustration, all the jealousy, all the racist bile that had been festering since the moment she first saw that green Mustang erupted in a final explosion of rage. Amara's unshakable composure had disarmed her verbally. Her insults and threats had proven powerless. Words failed her, so she reached for the only tool left. "Don't you pity me, bitch," Vivian howled. The air crackled with menace. The carefully tended lawns and flowering beds stood silent witness as the last barrier of civilization fell. Vivian's face was a mask of animal fury. She was no longer a neighborhood housewife. She was a predator ready to strike. The quiet Saturday morning was about to be shattered by an act of violence so shocking, so brazen, that it would reverberate far beyond the peaceful boundaries of Willow Creek Estates. The mask was not merely broken. It had been pulverized, and what lay beneath was terrifying to behold. Vivian lunged. It was not a slap or a punch. It was something more primal, more degrading. Her hands, like claws, shot out and tangled in Amara's magnificent hair. She clenched her fists, seizing a thick handful of the beautiful black curls she so despised, and yanked with all her strength. The attack was sudden and brutal. A cry of pain and surprise tore from Amara's throat. The world tilted violently. The force of the pull threw her off balance. Her gold sandals offered no purchase on the smooth asphalt. Her feet tangled, and for one horrible instant of weightlessness, she fell. Crack. The sound was obscene, a wet, sickening impact that echoed across the manicured lawn. It was the sound of Amara's head striking the pavement. The blow sent a blinding, searing pain through her skull. The world dissolved into a dizzying swirl of green grass and blue sky. For a second, she lay stunned, breathless, as her mind struggled to process the savage, unprovoked violence. Vivian stood over her, panting, a wild, triumphant light in her eyes, still gripping a lock of Amara's hair and pinning her head to the ground. "See?" she whispered, her face mere inches from Amara's. "See what happens when you don't listen?" "You should have moved the car." From the doorway, Tessa, Amara's friend, screamed a raw, tearing cry of horror. "Get off her! Oh my God! Somebody help!" Mr. Holloway, the neighbor with the pruning shears, dropped his tool with a metallic clatter and fumbled for his phone with trembling hands. "I'm calling 911!" he shouted, his voice shaking with shock. The image of a witness with a phone seemed to pierce Vivian's rage for a moment. She released Mara's hair and stumbled backward as if burned. Yet there was no remorse on her face, only defiant, self-righteous fury. Amara pushed herself up onto her elbows. Her head throbbed with a deep, sickening pain. A warm trickle of blood snaked from a cut on her scalp down her temple, a stark crimson line against her dark skin. The beautiful emerald silk of her dress was now stained with dirt and a spreading dark blotch of her own blood, where her shoulder had scraped the rough asphalt. She was dazed, bruised, and bleeding in the street of a neighborhood that was supposed to be her home. "You're crazy," Amara whispered, the words coming in broken gasps. "You assaulted me." "I defended myself," Vivian shouted, already constructing the narrative that would absolve her. "You were threatening me. You were aggressive. Everyone saw it." She glared furiously at Mr. Holloway, who was now speaking urgently into his phone. "She came at me. I feared for my life." The lie was so brazen, so audacious, that it nearly took Amara's breath away. Using every remaining ounce of strength and will, Amara pushed herself into a sitting position. The world spun, but she forced herself to stay still. Her magnificent dress was ruined. Her head was bleeding. Her body ached. Yet when she looked at Vivian, her eyes were clear, focused, and filled with a cold, hard fire, more intimidating than any shout. The victim refused to act the part. "You're a liar," Amara said in a firm voice despite the pain. The defiance even now enraged Vivian. "Oh, yeah?" she sneered, crossing her arms. "Well, it's your word against mine, and my husband is a police sergeant. Who do you think they're going to believe?" She pulled out her own phone and tapped the screen with triumphant urgency. "In fact, you don't even have to wait for 911. I'll call him right now. He's on duty. He'll be here in minutes to take you away in handcuffs for assaulting me. You'll be in jail where you belong by dinner time." She raised the phone to her ear, a cruel, victorious smile spreading across her face. In her mind, the battle was over. She had physically dominated her opponent and was now summoning the power of the law to finish the job. She had assaulted a woman in broad daylight in front of witnesses and was completely convinced she was about to get away with it. She had no idea that her act of savage violence and this triumphant phone call had just sealed her own fate and her husband's in the most catastrophic way imaginable. The trap she believed she was setting for Amara was in fact closing around her. Less than 5 minutes later, a municipal police cruiser came tearing around the corner, siren blaring and lights flashing. It was a theatrical overresponse for what was theoretically a simple neighborhood dispute. The car screeched to a halt, parking diagonally across the street in a flagrant display of authority, its doors nearly brushing the front fender of the infamous Honda Civic. Officer Garrett Ashford climbed out of the driver's side, his face grim and determined. He did not look like a peace officer arriving to de-escalate a situation. He looked like a soldier arriving to reinforce his comrade in battle. He took in the scene at a glance, his wife Vivian standing on the sidewalk with an air of moral superiority and defiance. Mr. Holloway across the street still on the phone, pale and shocked. Amara's friend Tessa hovering helplessly on the porch, and Amara herself, now standing though slightly unsteady, one hand pressed to her temple, fingers stained with blood, the shoulder of her beautiful dress ruined. Garrett's gaze rested on Amara for an instant. Cold eyes, devoid of compassion, his professional duty to assess injuries, separate the parties, and gather impartial witness statements was abandoned completely. He did not see the victim of a violent assault. He saw the cause of his wife's agitation, the problem that needed to be removed. "What happened here, Viv?" he asked in a low growl, addressing only his wife. "She attacked me, Garrett!" Vivian cried, rushing to his side and pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at Amara. "We were arguing about her friend's car, and she went crazy. She got in my face, screaming, threatening me. I had to defend myself. Garrett put a protective arm around his wife's shoulders, placing himself between her and Amara. It was a clear physical declaration of loyalty. "Are you all right?" he asked Vivienne, his voice softened by concern. "I'm shaken, but I'm fine," she said, playing the fragile victim role to perfection. Only then did Garrett turn his full attention to Amara. He walked toward her, one hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered weapon. His expression was not inquisitive, but accusatory. "I'm going to need to see some identification," he ordered in a hard official voice. Amara looked at him, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with a cold, clarifying rage. The injustice was so flagrant, so brazenly corrupt, that it felt almost surreal. "Your wife just assaulted me, officer," she said, her voice trembling slightly with contained fury. "She grabbed me by the hair and threw me to the ground. I'm bleeding, and you're asking me for identification?" "I'll ask the questions here," Garrett snapped. "I get a call about an assault, and I find you standing here, and my wife visibly distressed. Now show me your ID, or I'll arrest you for obstruction." "Garrett, what are you doing?" Mr. Holloway shouted from across the street, finally finding his voice. "I saw the whole thing. Your wife attacked her. She grabbed her by the hair and threw her to the ground. It was an unprovoked assault." Garrett shot the older man a venomous look. "Stay out of it, Holloway," he growled. "This is police business. Go back to your house." The threat was clear. "Challenge my authority, and you'll have problems too." Mr. Holloway recoiled as if struck, his face tight with fear and disgust, and took a hesitant step toward his property. Garrett turned back to Amara. "Last chance. Identification. Now." Drawing a deep breath, Amara reached into the small purse she had managed to retrieve from the porch, pulled out her wallet, and handed him her driver's license. He snatched it from her hand and looked at it. "Amara Sinclair," he read aloud in a mocking tone. "Well, Sinclair, my wife wants to press charges against you for assault, so I need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back." It was happening. He was really going to do it. He was going to arrest the victim of his wife's crime. Tessa gasped from the porch. "You can't be serious," Amara said in a dangerously low voice. "You're abusing your authority, Officer Ashford. You're attempting a false arrest. That's a crime." Garrett let out a short, ugly laugh. "You really want to lecture me about the law, lady? In this neighborhood, I am the law, and the law says you're going to jail." He stepped forward, reaching for his handcuffs. The metallic click as he opened the pouch was a definitive sound. He was crossing a line of no return. His loyalty to his wife, combined with his own prejudice and arrogance, had blinded him completely to his duty, to the law he had sworn to uphold, and to the catastrophic consequences of his actions. He was about to handcuff the daughter of the one man in the entire state with the power to destroy him completely, and he did it with a self-satisfied, confident smile. Just as Garrett Ashford seized Amara's arm, the sound of a different siren cut through the air. Second patrol car, this time a standard unit dispatched by Fier Holloway's 911 call, barreled into the cul-de-sac and screeched to a stop behind Garrett's cruiser. A young, inexperienced officer climbed out, his face wide-eyed. "Sergeant?" he asked, taking in the scene. "Dispatch got a call about an assault. What's going on?" The arrival of a second, uninvolved officer changed the dynamic instantly. Garrett could no longer arrest Amara without creating a contradictory paper trail. The confident smile faded from his face, replaced by a flash of irritation. "I've got it under control, Brennan," Garrett growled. "Just a neighborhood dispute. False alarm. But the woman's bleeding, Sergeant," Officer Brennan said, pointing hesitantly at Amara. Vivienne, seeing her husband's advantage slipping away, went on the attack. "She fell!" she shouted. "After she threatened me, she tripped and fell." The lie was pathetic, but it was enough to muddy the waters. Garrett seized the opportunity. "Look, Brennan, I've got this. Take statements from everyone, but it's a he said, she said. No charges for now. Just write up a report. I'm taking my wife home. She's had a traumatic experience." Without another glance at Amara, Garrett put his arm around Vivian and guided her back across the street. A look of smug victory was on his face. He had been prevented from making the arrest, but he had succeeded in stifling the official response. He had used his rank to intimidate a junior officer and ensure that the official report would be an ineffective, ambiguous document that would lead nowhere. The slam of their front door was a final act of contempt. Officer Brennan, looking deeply uncomfortable, took a brief, perfunctory statement from a still-shocked Mr. Holloway, then approached Amara. That was polite, but his deference to his sergeant was obvious. He handed her a victim rights pamphlet and an incident number, carefully avoiding looking at the blood on her dress. "You can contact the station on Monday if you want, ma'am," he murmured before climbing back into his car and driving away, leaving Amara alone on the blood-stained pavement. Her friends rushed to her side, embracing her with concern and outrage. They helped her inside. The house that was supposed to be a sanctuary now felt violated. They cleaned the cut on her head, superficial but bleeding heavily, and tended the scrapes on her shoulder. They fussed over her, offering to stay, to call a lawyer, to do anything at all. Yet after the initial shock passed, a chilling serenity settled over Amara. The fury that should have been on her face disappeared, replaced by a glacial, focused calm. "Thank you, everyone. Really," she said in a firm voice. "But I need you to go now. I have something to take care of." Alone, after her friends had reluctantly departed with worried faces, Amara remained in the quiet of her new home. She did not rush to the mirror to survey the damage. She did not collapse onto a sofa and weep. She did not pace furiously through the rooms. Instead, she walked with steady, measured steps to her home office. The room was her command center, a space of minimalist design, with clean lines and cutting-edge technology seamlessly integrated into the decor. She sat in the leather chair behind her large mahogany desk. Her first action was to take out her smartphone. She activated the front camera. The screen illuminated her face, showing the scalp cut and the scratches on her shoulder in high-definition detail. She took several sharp, well-lit photographs from different angles, her expression as neutral and objective as that of a crime scene photographer. This was not a victim's selfie. It was the documentation of evidence. Only then did she pick up a second phone from her desk, a sleek black device with no markings. It was a satellite phone connected to a secure network. She pressed a speed dial button. The phone did not ring. The line simply connected with a soft click. "Amara, you're using this line. Is everything all right?" A deep, resonant voice answered. The concern was immediate and palpable. "I'm fine, Dad, but there's been an incident," she said, her voice betraying none of the trauma she had just endured. "Tell me." "My new neighbor, Vivian Ashford, just assaulted me in the street in front of my house." There was a sepulchral silence on the other end of the line. For several seconds, the only sound was the faint hiss of the satellite connection. Lucien Sinclair, the state's attorney general, a man who hunted murderers and dismantled criminal organizations, was absorbing the fact that someone had dared to lay hands on his only daughter. "Define assault," he said at last, his voice dangerously low and stripped of all warmth. It was the voice he used in courtrooms, the voice that made hardened criminals confess. "She grabbed me by the hair and threw me to the ground. My head hit the pavement, Amara recited, as if reading a field report. The entire incident was preceded by a racist tirade. I have at least one independent witness. Her husband is a sergeant with the local police. Garrett Ashford arrived on scene and attempted to arrest me. Another pause, this time shorter and more threatening. What? He tried to arrest you? His wife was the clear aggressor. I told him he was committing a false arrest. Another officer arrived, and Ashford shut down the investigation. He told the junior officer to write a he said, she said report, and took his wife home. Good, Lucienne Sinclair said, the word like a shard of ice. That's even better. That's not just misconduct. It's conspiracy and obstruction of justice under color of law. They just handed us their careers on a silver platter. He drew a deep breath, shifting from paternal rage to strategic precision. All right, sweetheart, listen to me. Do not speak to the local police again. They're compromised. I'm sending a team from the state's Criminal Investigation Division. They're not local. They answer only to me. They'll be at your house within a couple of hours, in plain clothes, in an unmarked car. They'll take your official statement and the evidence you've gathered. They'll handle everything. Understood? Yes, Dad, Amara said softly. I love you, Siri, he said. The words carried the force of a fierce protective promise. These people have no idea what they've done. They picked a fight with a lion thinking she was a lamb, and now they're going to hear her roar. He ended the call. The storm had been unleashed. The telephone conversation that lasted less than 3 minutes activated the response of the highest state authorities. Vivian and Garrett Ashford, safe in their house across the street, believed they had won. They had no idea they had just declared war on the state itself. Across the street, in the beige and gray sanctuary of the Ashford home, an atmosphere of triumphant excitement and adrenaline prevailed. Vivian paced her living room, her face still flushed from the confrontation, recounting her version of the story for the 3rd time to Garrett. With each telling, her actions became more justified, her courage more pronounced, and Amara's alleged provocations more atrocious. And then she had the nerve to say I was making a fool of myself. Vivian spat, clenching her fists. Can you believe it? In my own neighborhood. So I grabbed her. I taught her a lesson she won't forget. You should have seen her face, Garrett. She went down. Garrett Ashford, seated in his favorite armchair with a cold beer, felt a surge of pride mixed with a small, persistent professional unease. Part of him, the part that was still a cop, knew this was bad. The bleeding woman, the independent witness, the arrival of another officer. It was a mess. But that part of him was drowned by the stronger, more primitive satisfaction of watching his wife enforce the tribal boundaries he so prized. The black woman had been put in her place. Good for you, honey, he said, taking a long swallow of beer. She had it coming. These people only understand one thing. You've got to show them who's in charge. Exactly, Vivian said, beaming. She felt powerful, validated. And you were incredible. The way you shut that nosy old Holloway up and that rookie Brennan looked like he was about to wet himself. He knows better than to question a sergeant, Garrett said with a confident smile. I'll make sure his report reflects the ambiguity of the situation. It'll get filed and disappear. Let her complain all she wants on Monday. It's her word against a sergeant's. Who do you think the captain's going to believe? He chuckled at his own casual corruption. It was well-trodden ground for him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, savoring the glow of their apparent victory. They watched Amara's house from the window. They saw her friends leave. Then nothing. The silence across the street was, to them, irrefutable proof of Amara's fear and submission. See? Vivian said a couple of hours later as she prepared dinner. Nothing. She's terrified. She knows she can't win. We won, Garrett. We showed her that Willow Creek isn't for her. Their arrogance was a fortress built on a foundation of prejudice and a lifetime of unearned privilege. The idea that Amara might be anything other than a frightened, isolated victim was incomprehensible to them. They were so busy congratulating themselves that they failed to notice the discreet, dark gray sedan parked 3 blocks away. They failed to notice the 2 men in casual business attire who stepped out and began a slow, methodical reconnaissance of the neighborhood, starting with the houses farthest from the street and working inward. They were not local police. They were state investigators from the Criminal Investigation Division, the Attorney General's elite unit. Their movements were silent, professional, and completely invisible to the Ashfords. Their first stop was Mr. Holloway's house. At first he hesitated, still shaken by Garrett Ashford's earlier threat. But when the investigators showed their state credentials and assured him of full witness protection in a state-level investigation, the story poured out. He recounted every detail of Vivian's unprovoked attack and Garrett's subsequent attempt to intimidate both him and Amara. He eagerly agreed to give a formal sworn statement. The investigators were meticulous. They spoke with 2 other neighbors who had seen portions of the altercation from their windows. They obtained security camera footage from a house down the street that, while it did not capture the assault itself, clearly established the timeline: the arrival of Amara's guests, Vivian's furious exit from her house, and the arrival and departure of both police cruisers. Each piece of evidence was another thread in the silent net they were weaving around the Ashfords. Finally, under cover of dusk, the 2 investigators arrived at Amara's door. They were welcomed into the quiet, still house. For more than an hour, Amara recounted her story, her memory for detail, precise and unshakable. She handed over the digital dossier she had been compiling throughout the previous week, detailing Garrett Ashford's campaign of harassment. She gave them the photographs she had taken of her injuries. Every statement was recorded, every piece of evidence cataloged. As they left, the lead investigator paused at the door. "Ms. Sinclair," he said with respectful gravity, "on behalf of the state, I apologize for what you've endured. I want to assure you this is being taken with the utmost seriousness at the highest level. Officer Ashford and his wife will be held accountable." As the investigator's sedan slipped silently into the night, Amara stood at her window, gazing at the dark, quiet house across the street. The Ashfords were probably in there eating dinner, watching television, sleeping the deep, peaceful sleep of the truly ignorant. They believed themselves safe in their castle, celebrating a successful siege. In reality, they were prisoners in a glass cage, performing for an audience they could not see. Their victory was an illusion, and their arrogance was the rope they were cheerfully tying around their own necks. Justice was not sleeping. It was simply gathering strength. And the silence across the street was not the silence of fear. It was the quiet, patient silence of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Following a carefully planned strategy discussed with her father, Amara drove to the 4th Precinct, the station where Sergeant Garrett Ashford worked. The purpose of the visit was twofold. First, to file an official complaint and create a record of the assault and misconduct. Second, to document the inevitable institutional failure of the local department to police its own. It was a necessary move in the legal chess game, a play designed to checkmate the king by first proving that all his pawns were corrupt. The precinct was a grim 1980s brick building that smelled of stale coffee, industrial cleaner, and quiet desperation. It was a place where hope flickered out beneath the buzzing fluorescent lights. Amara, dressed in an elegant, conservative navy pantsuit, with her hair pulled into a severe bun, crossed the threshold with the same unshakable poise she brought to every aspect of her life. The cut on her scalp was hidden by her hair, but a faint yellowish bruise was visible at her temple. She approached the reception desk, where a bored-looking sergeant was scrolling through his phone. He looked up, and his expression shifted from boredom to a mixture of surprise and suspicion as he took in her expensive suit and the color of her skin. In this station, women who looked like Amara were usually high-powered attorneys, not civilians filing complaints. "Can I help you?" he asked in a flat tone. "Yes," Amara replied in a calm, professional voice. "I need to file a formal assault complaint against a civilian, Vivian Ashford. I also need to file an official complaint of misconduct and harassment against one of your officers, Sergeant Garrett Ashford." The desk sergeant's eyebrows rose. He set the phone down. Mentioning a particular officer's name, especially a sergeant's, changed the dynamic completely. "You want to file a complaint against Sergeant Ashford?" he asked, his voice now laced with disbelief and a hint of hostility. "That's correct," Amara said. He stared at her for a long moment, then sighed and picked up the desk phone. "Captain Donovan," he growled. "There's a woman here wants to complain about Ashford." He listened for a moment. "Yeah, okay." He hung up and looked at Amara. "Captain wants to see you. End of the hall, last door on the right." Amara followed his directions down a dingy corridor to an office with Captain Robert Donovan etched on the frosted glass. She knocked once. "It's open," a gravelly voice called. The office was small and cluttered, dominated by a large metal desk and a wall covered with plaques and yellowing photographs of Donovan, shaking hands with local politicians. Captain Donovan was a man in his 50s, with a rough face seamed by whiskey and a belly that strained the buttons of his uniform shirt. He looked like someone who had been sitting behind the same desk for 20 years, his idealism eroding day by day and replaced by a cynical, weary tribalism. His tribe was his officers, and his primary job, as he saw it, was to protect them from the outside world. "Sit down," he said, gesturing toward a scarred wooden chair without looking up from the report he was reading. Amara sat and waited in silence. Finally, Donovan set the report aside and looked at her, his gaze lingering for a moment on the bruise at her temple. "Well," he said, leaning back in his creaking chair. "Desk sergeant says you've got a problem with one of my best men, Sergeant Ashford." "Yes," Amara said. "On Saturday afternoon, his wife, Vivian Ashford, physically assaulted me. Sergeant Ashford arrived on scene and, instead of performing his duty, attempted to arrest me, the victim of the crime. This occurred after a week of harassment he had been conducting against me." Donovan picked up a pen and tapped it against a stain on his desk. "Assaulted you. That's a strong word. I've got the incident report right here." He held up a sheet of paper filed by Officer Brennan. "Says it was a simple neighborhood dispute, verbal only. Says you fell." "The report is a lie, Captain," Amara said, her voice icy. "It was written under the direction of Sergeant Ashford, who intimidated the people who arrived. That is a clear conflict of interest and obstruction of justice." "What it is," Donovan said, his voice hardening, "is the word of 2 decorated officers of my department against yours." He left the word hanging in the air, waiting with an unspoken prejudice. "You got any proof of this alleged assault?" "I have a sworn statement from my neighbor, Mr. Holloway, who saw the entire thing," Amara said. Donovan narrowed his eyes slightly. "Holloway? Sure, we can talk to him. But frankly, this looks like a classic he said, she said. A simple neighborhood spat that got out of hand. My advice is you go home and try to get along with your neighbors. Filing a complaint like this against the wife of a good officer is only going to make things harder for you in the long run." It was a threat delivered with the paternalistic air of a man offering friendly advice. Amara stood. The checkmate was complete. She had given the department the opportunity to act, and officially, through a captain, they had chosen to obstruct justice and protect their own. "Thank you for your time, Captain," she said in a voice devoid of emotion. "You've made the department's position perfectly clear." She turned and walked out of the office, leaving Captain Donovan sitting behind his desk, secure in the belief that he had successfully quashed another inconvenient complaint. I had no idea that every word of their conversation, every syllable of his threatening, dismissive advice, had been clearly recorded by a micro-transmitter concealed in a pen in her hand. He believed he was burying a complaint. In reality, he was only digging a deeper hole for his own career and for the entire precinct. The Ashfords, buoyed by Captain Donovan's assurance that Amara's complaint had been effectively handled, felt invincible. The system they trusted had worked exactly as designed. It had protected them. To celebrate their triumph and further consolidate their position as the dominant force on the cul-de-sac, Vivian decided to host an impromptu barbecue in the backyard that evening. It was a victory party, a gathering of her loyal subjects to boast about the successful defeat of the outsider. The guest list was a carefully curated selection of their closest friends and neighbors, people who shared their worldview and their prejudices. There was another officer from Garrett's precinct and his wife, plus 2 other couples from the neighborhood, who formed Vivian's suburban gossip court. They gathered in the Ashfords' meticulously maintained backyard, a space with stone pavers, an expensive built-in gas grill, and perfectly arranged outdoor furniture. The air smelled of grilled meat, cheap beer, and latent resentment. They were completely unaware that their private celebration was, in fact, a live performance for an audience of state investigators. Every boast, every insult, every conspiratorial whisper was being transmitted directly to a nearby surveillance van, where analysts recorded and transcribed the conversation in real time. "I'm telling you, you should have seen her face when Donovan showed her the report," Garrett was saying, spatula in one hand and beer in the other, embellishing the story of Amara's visit to the station. She walked in like she owned the place and walked out looking like she'd been put in her place. His friend, the other officer, roared with laughter. "That's the captain. He knows how to take care of his men. Buried that complaint so deep they won't find it with a shovel." "Damn right," Garrett said, flipping a row of burgers with a flourish. "She tried to get Holloway to back her up. Donovan basically told her to go home and be a good neighbor, told her to shut up and know her place." Meanwhile, Vivian held court on the other side of the patio, sipping a glass of Chardonnay and accepting the praise of the other wives. "You're so brave, Vivian," said one of them, a woman named Linda, breathless with admiration. "I would have been scared, but you just went right out there and handled it." "Well, somebody had to," Vivian said, basking in the praise. She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Truth is, I was shaking, but when she looked at me with that arrogant, superior attitude, I just snapped. I grabbed that ridiculous hair of hers and put her on the ground, and I don't regret it. I'd do it again. People like that need to be reminded that this is our world, not theirs. We built this. We own this." "What's she going to do about it?" another wife asked. "Make her life miserable," Vivian confessed cheerfully. "He's going to keep watching the neighborhood. A few traffic stops for a broken taillight. Maybe a little chat with her guests every time someone visits. We're going to run her out of town. You watch. By Christmas, that house will be back on the market." The conversation continued in that vein for more than an hour, a cesspool of racism, gossip, and criminal conspiracy. They mocked Amara's appearance, speculated about her finances, and outlined their plans to harass her further, all while laughing and drinking beneath the setting sun. They felt secure, cocooned in the echo chamber of their own hatred, completely oblivious to the fact that their words were being recorded, their plans documented, and their destinies sealed. In the surveillance, the lead DCI investigator listened with a grim, stone-faced expression. He had taken down organized crime figures who spoke with more honor than these people. "We've got everything," the audio analyst said, removing his headphones. "Conspiracy to file a false police report. Conspiracy to commit ongoing harassment under color of law. Multiple admissions of the original assault, and a dozen possible hate crime enhancements. It's a goldmine." The investigator reviewed the file on his laptop. It now contained sworn witness statements, security recordings, medical reports of Amara's injuries, a recording of a police captain obstructing justice, and now a complete audio confession from the perpetrators themselves. "They're not just celebrating an assault," the investigator told his partner. "They're celebrating a worldview. They're celebrating the idea that the rules don't apply to them, and that they have the right to terrorize anyone who doesn't fit. The Attorney General wants to send a message." He took out his secure phone and made a call. "Sir," he said, addressing Lucian Sinclair, "we've got more than enough. The case is solid." "Good," the Attorney General's voice replied, cold and clear. "Then it's time to deliver the message, finalize the arrest warrants. I want them in custody by dawn." The Last Supper of the condemned was drawing to a close. The guests were leaving, the grill was cooling, and the Ashfords were preparing for bed. The deep, peaceful sleep of the truly ignorant. They had no idea that only a few kilometers away, a team of highly trained state tactical officers was preparing to hold them to account. Night settled over Willow Creek Estates, wrapping the quiet cul-de-sac in a mantle of darkness and silence. For the Ashfords, it was a night like any other. They washed the dishes, watched television mindlessly, and by 10:30, were in bed without guilt or fear. Their world was small, secure, and, in their minds, perfectly controlled. They slept the deep, dreamless sleep of the self-righteous, unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon. Across the street, the lights in Amara's house were also dark, but she was not sleeping. She sat in a comfortable armchair in her upstairs bedroom, a cup of chamomile tea steaming gently on the table beside her. She wore a simple silk robe, her hair gathered loosely. The window offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the Ashford house, a dark silhouette against the starry sky. She was calm. The fury of recent days had settled into a deep, almost serene sense of inevitability. She was a woman, waiting for a dawn she knew would change everything. A few kilometers away, in an anonymous industrial park, the final preparations were underway. Inside a large, unmarked warehouse that served as the state's tactical staging area, the atmosphere was one of quiet concentration. 2 black armored tactical vans sat with engines idling softly. A team of 12 DCI tactical officers in matte black body armor, helmets, and night vision goggles performed final equipment checks. There was no chatter, no bravado. Only the soft click of magazine seating, the rustle of nylon straps being adjusted, and the quiet hum of sophisticated communications gear. The team leader gathered his men. "All right, listen up," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "Targets are Vivian and Garrett Ashford. Garrett is a local police sergeant, presumed armed. Both are considered hostile, based on their own statements. Our objective is total surprise and overwhelming force. We breach, secure. This is a high-profile case. We do it by the book, clean and fast. Any questions? There were none. They had studied the floor plans of the Ashford house for hours. They knew the layout better than the Ashfords did. They had thermal imagery of the bedroom where the target slept. They knew which floorboards creaked. At a predetermined hour, they boarded the vans. The heavy doors closed with a final, definitive thud. The convoy left the industrial park. 2 armored vans and 3 chase vehicles, moving like ghosts through the pre-dawn darkness. They traveled the sleepy suburban streets without lights, drivers navigating by night vision. As they turned onto the final street leading to the Willow Creek cul-de-sac, the world held its breath. The sky was only beginning to take on the first faint hints of gray. The air was cool and still. It was the perfect moment of peace before controlled chaos erupted. At her window, Amara watched as the dark silhouettes of the vans slid silently into position at both ends of the street, sealing any escape. She saw dark figures descend, moving with fluid, predatory grace across the well-kept lawns. The stillness of the morning was about to be irrevocably broken. The hammer of justice was raised, ready to fall. In the silent pre-dawn gloom of the master bedroom, the digital clock on the nightstand advanced. In that same instant, the world as the Ashfords knew it ceased to exist. The first sound was not a knock, but an explosion. A controlled breaching charge, placed on the front door lock, blew the mechanism inward with a deafening crack that was more a physical concussion than a noise. The heavy oak door, symbol of their suburban security, flew open, slamming into the interior wall and splintering the frame. Simultaneously, the large picture window of their living room disintegrated into a million glittering fragments as a flashbang grenade arced through the air and detonated inside. The resulting explosion of light and sound was blinding, deafening, and completely disorienting. "State Police, get down!" The shouts were a synchronized, terrifying roar, amplified and inhuman, coming from a dozen different throats. Garrett Ashford bolted upright in pure primal terror, heart hammering against his ribs. His first thought, the conditioned reflex of a cop, was to reach for the 9mm pistol he kept in the nightstand drawer. He never made it. Before his fingers could even touch the cold steel of the weapon, the bedroom door exploded inward, ripped from its hinges by a battering ram. The doorway filled with a terrifying silhouette, a massive figure in full tactical gear, a brilliant tactical light mounted on his rifle pinning Garrett against the wall and blinding him. "Hands! Show me your hands now!" the agent shouted. Across the bed, Vivian was screaming, a high, hysterical shriek of pure panic. She pulled the sheets up to her chin, shrinking in fear as 2 more agents flooded the room. "On the floor, face down!" an agent ordered Garrett. A heavy boot kicked the backs of his knees, and he collapsed onto the plush carpet. In seconds, his hands were secured behind his back, the cold, tight bite of plastic flex cuffs digging into his wrists. Outside, the cul-de-sac had erupted. Lights came on in every house. Sleepy, confused neighbors peered through their blinds, pale with shock. They saw the armored vans, the heavily armed men in black, the shattered facade of the Ashford house. They saw Garrett and Vivian, dressed only in their pajamas, he in underwear and a t-shirt, she in a silk nightgown, being unceremoniously dragged toward the front door. Vivian was still screaming, her cries incoherent. "My husband is a police officer! You can't do this! We have rights!" "You're being read your rights, ma'am," an agent said calmly as he guided her toward a waiting unmarked car. Garrett remained silent. His face was a mask of disbelief and growing horror. The cocky, self-assured bully had vanished, replaced by a terrified, confused man in his underwear. As he was pushed toward a car, he glimpsed the faces of his neighbors in the windows, staring at him with wide, astonished eyes. The humiliation was a physical blow. Then his gaze drifted across the street. In the window of the house opposite, only one light was on. A figure stood there, partially hidden by shadows, watching the scene. It was Amara Sinclair. She held a cup of coffee, her expression one of perfect, terrifying calm. Her eyes met for a fraction of a second across the battlefield of their carefully tended gardens. And in that instant, Garrett Ashford understood. The incomprehensible violence, the overwhelming force, everything clicked into place. This was not a local matter. This was not a neighborhood dispute. This was about her, the woman he had dismissed, harassed, and tried to arrest. He had considered her a nobody. He had made a catastrophic mistake. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. As the car door slammed shut, plunging him into darkness, the only image burned into his mind was her serene, triumphant face in the window across the street. The hammer had fallen, and his world had shattered. The cold, sterile environment of a DCI field office interrogation room is designed to strip away every trace of power and comfort. There are no windows. The walls are a dull gray that absorbs sound. The furniture consists of a single heavy steel table bolted to the floor and 3 hard plastic chairs. It is a sensory isolation chamber where the only thing that matters is the truth, and the agents who work there are experts at extracting it. Garrett and Vivian Ashford were processed and placed in 2 separate rooms at opposite ends of a long, silent corridor. Their pajamas were taken, and they were given shapeless gray jumpsuits. Photographs, fingerprints, and DNA samples were collected. The entire process was cold, efficient, and utterly dehumanizing. The last vestiges of their suburban identity were stripped away, leaving them exposed and terrified. Garrett sat alone for what felt like an eternity, the silence pressing in on him. The adrenaline of the raid had long since dissipated, replaced by a nauseating mixture of fear and confusion. He tried to reconstruct it all. State police. A full tactical raid. For what? His mind kept returning to Amara's face in the window, but he could not make the leap. Who was she? Finally, the door opened. A man in a tailored, dark suit entered. It was the lead investigator, Langley, who had been quietly building the case against them. He sat across from Garrett and placed a thin file folder on the table between them. He did not open it. "Sergeant Ashford," Langley began in a quiet, familiar voice. "I'm going to be very direct with you. Your life as you know it is over. The only thing we're here to determine is how long you'll spend in a state penitentiary." Garrett swallowed hard, his throat dry. He tried to summon the bravado of his police persona. "I don't know what this is about," he blustered. "I'm a cop. I have rights. I want my union rep and a lawyer." "You'll get a lawyer," Langley said softly. "But let's not waste each other's time with the thin blue line. Your badge means nothing in this room. In fact, it's the reason the penalties you're facing are so severe. You took an oath to uphold the law, and you used it as a weapon." Langley leaned slightly forward. "This is about Amara Sinclair." Garrett's heart constricted. It was her. "It was a neighborhood dispute," he stammered. "A misunderstanding." "Was it a misunderstanding when you used your patrol car to harass her?" Langley asked, his voice still quiet, but now edged with steel. "Was it a misunderstanding when you conspired with Captain Donovan to bury her complaint? Or when you stood by while your wife bragged about assaulting her and planned to run her out of town?" Garrett went pale. They knew everything. How was that possible? Langley smiled, a cold, humorless expression. He reached out and touched a small speaker on the table. He pressed a button. Vivian's voice filled the silent room, thin and distorted, but unmistakably hers. I grabbed that ridiculous hair of hers and put her on the ground, and I don't regret it. I'd do it again. The recording stopped. Garrett stared at the speaker as if it were a snake. The barbecue. They had recorded the barbecue. In the interrogation room at the far end of the corridor, Vivian was trying a different tactic. She was playing the victim. She sat hunched in her chair, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, performing theatrical distress for the investigator seated across from her. "I don't understand," she sobbed. "We were asleep. These armed men kicked in our door. I'm a mother, a wife. I'm the head of my homeowners association committee. I'm a good person." The investigator, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Agent Vargas, let her cry for a moment before speaking. "Mrs. Ashford," she said in a voice devoid of compassion, "let's talk about Saturday afternoon. Let's talk about your interaction with your new neighbor, Amara Sinclair." Vivian's tears dried as if by magic. Her expression hardened. "That woman is the problem. She's aggressive. She threatened me. I feared for my life." "Feared for your life," Agent Vargas repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's interesting, because we have a sworn statement from your neighbor, Mr. Holloway, who says you were the sole aggressor. We also have this." Vargas turned a laptop on the table to face Vivian and hit play. The screen showed high-definition, high-clarity security footage taken by a neighbor's camera aimed down the street. It showed Vivian striding furiously across her lawn. It showed her grabbing Amara by the hair and violently throwing her to the ground. Audio from a nearby smart doorbell captured the sounds perfectly. Amara's cry of pain, Tessa's scream, Vivian's shouts of hatred. Vivian stared at the screen, her face ashen. The video was irrefutable. "That video's been edited. It's fake," she babbled, her voice rising in panic. Agent Vargas did not respond. She simply closed the laptop. "The video is real, Mrs. Ashford. So is the audio recording of your backyard barbecue, where you confessed to the assault and conspired with your husband to escalate your campaign of harassment." Vivian's bravado shattered. The mask of the righteous suburban matron dissolved, revealing the terrified, cornered bully underneath. The world she had controlled with mockery and threats had just been obliterated by irrefutable high-tech evidence. Back in Garrett's room, Investigator Langley slid a photograph across the table. It was a snapshot of Amara Sinclair laughing with an older, handsome, powerful-looking black man. The man's arm was around her. The photo had been taken at a law enforcement charity event. The man was the state's Attorney General, Lucien Sinclair. "Do you know who this is, Sergeant?" Langley asked. Garrett looked at the photo and recognized the man instantly. Every cop in the state knew who the Attorney General was. He was a legend. "That's Attorney General Sinclair," Garrett whispered, his voice breaking. "Correct," Langley said. "And the woman whose arm he's around, the woman your wife assaulted, the woman you terrorized and attempted to falsely arrest, is his daughter." The final piece of the puzzle locked into place, and the catastrophic magnitude of his stupidity hit Garrett Ashford with the force of a physical blow. The room seemed to spin. He had picked a fight with the family of the most powerful lawman in the state. He covered his face with his hands. It was over. Everything was over. There would be no union rep, no friendly captain to fix this. He had not merely stepped on a landmine. He had detonated a nuclear bomb on his own life. The unraveling was complete. All that remained was to tally the cost. The hours following their interrogations were a slow methodical dismantling of the Ashfords' lives. While they sat in separate cells contemplating the wreckage, the full coordinated power of the state government was applied not only to their liberty, but to every aspect of their existence. This was not merely punishment. This was eradication. This was about setting an example so profound that no one in a position of power in the state would ever again believe this kind of behavior was acceptable. Independent team from the Attorney General's Public Integrity Unit, armed with a judicial warrant signed by a state judge even before the raid began, arrived at the 4th Precinct. They did not merely enter, they took possession. Captain Robert Donovan was summoned from his office and informed that he had been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into obstruction of justice and conspiracy. His computer, his files, and his phone were confiscated. The station was thrown into upheaval as investigators launched a comprehensive audit of every case Garrett Ashford had been involved in over the previous 5 years, searching for patterns of bias and misconduct. The blue wall had not merely been breached. It was being dismantled brick by brick. By midday, a uniformed internal affairs officer arrived at the local DCI office and formally notified Garrett Ashford of his termination from the police force. The letter was brutal and direct, citing gross misconduct, abuse of authority, and conduct unbecoming an officer. His badge, his weapon, his career, and, most devastatingly, his pension were gone. In a single morning, he had gone from respected sergeant to unemployed, disgraced civilian, facing a battery of criminal charges. But the criminal charges were only one front in this war. The second front was civil, and it was designed to be equally ruinous. As evening fell, 2 attorneys, one for Garrett and one for Vivian, both looking shocked and lost, were ushered into a conference room at the local DCI office. Waiting for them were the lead state prosecutor and a woman they did not recognize, an elegant, impeccably dressed attorney from the most prestigious civil rights firm in the state. She represented Amara Sinclair. "Gentlemen," the prosecutor began, "your clients are facing a minimum of 3 to 5 years in a state penitentiary. The evidence against them is, to put it mildly, irrefutable. We will not be offering a plea deal." Then the civil attorney spoke. "In addition to the criminal charges," she said in a cold, precise voice, "my client, Ms. Sinclair, is filing a civil lawsuit against Mr. and Mrs. Ashford. We are suing for assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of her civil rights." She slid a thick legal document across the table to each of them. "We are seeking compensatory damages," she continued, "for medical expenses, for the emotional trauma of the racial attack, and for punitive damages to punish the defendants for their malicious and intentional conduct." One of the defense attorneys flipped to the last page, searching for the number. He stopped, jaw slack. "You're seeking $5 million?" he asked in a tone of disbelief. "That is correct," the attorney replied without blinking. "And given that your client's assets are about to be frozen as part of the criminal investigation, we have already filed a lien against their primary residence in Willow Creek Estates. Whether they are found guilty or not in criminal court, we will win this civil case, and we will take their house." The stunned attorneys fell silent. It was a scorched earth legal strategy. The Ashfords were not only going to prison, they were going to lose everything: their home, their savings, their future. They would walk out of prison with only the clothes on their backs and a debt they could never repay. When the attorneys delivered the news to their respective clients in their cells, the reality of their situation finally crushed them. Vivian, upon learning she would lose her home, the symbol of her entire identity and social standing, broke into inconsolable sobs. The house was her kingdom, her fortress, the source of her power. Without it, she was nothing. Garrett's reaction was different. Upon hearing the list of charges, the prison sentence, and the financial ruin, he did not cry. A strange, terrifying calm settled over him. He finally understood the magnitude of the power he had provoked. This was not justice. This was targeted demolition. He remembered that first day, watching Amara in her emerald dress. He had wondered how she could afford to live in their neighborhood. The irony was a bitter, choking pill. He had questioned her wealth, and in doing so, he had guaranteed his own poverty. The price of his hatred, he now understood, was everything he had ever had, and everything he would ever have. The calculation was complete, and the result was total annihilation. The state's trial against the Ashfords was brief and brutal. In the sterile mahogany confines of a state courtroom, the tyrants of Willow Creek Estates looked small, diminished, and utterly pathetic. The case captured the attention of local media, a lurid story of suburban hatred and crumbling power. The courtroom filled daily with reporters, curious Willow Creek neighbors, and activists from civil rights groups. The prosecution, led by a deputy attorney general renowned for his relentlessness and personally chosen by Lucien Sinclair, laid out its case with the cold, methodical precision of a surgeon. They needed no inflammatory rhetoric. The evidence spoke for itself, and it screamed. The first exhibit was the video, played on a giant screen for the jury. The crisp security footage of Vivienne Ashford, seizing Amara's hair and slamming her head against the pavement, silenced the entire room. The sickening impact, captured by the doorbell audio, produced a visible shudder in several jurors. Then came the audio from the backyard barbecue. Jurors wearing headphones listened as the Ashfords and their friends laughed, joked, and conspired. Their words were a testament to their deep-seated prejudice and their arrogant belief in their own impunity. Vivian's boastful confession, "I grabbed that ridiculous hair of hers and threw her to the ground, and I don't regret it. I'd do it again," was particularly devastating. Captain Robert Donovan, who had been forced into early retirement and granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, took the stand looking shamefaced and defeated. Under oath, he admitted that he had deliberately dismissed Amara's complaint without proper investigation in order to protect his sergeant. His testimony tore down the wall of silence and exposed the informal corruption that had enabled Garrett Ashford's behavior for years. Mr. Holloway offered his eyewitness testimony in a clear, firm voice, painting a vivid picture of Vivian's unprovoked assault and Garrett's subsequent abuse of power. When Amara Sinclair took the stand, silence fell over the courtroom. She was the living embodiment of grace and dignity. Dressed in a simple yet elegant gray suit, she recounted the facts with the same unshakable calm she had displayed from the beginning. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She simply stated the facts. The defense attorney, a public defender who knew he was fighting a losing battle, attempted to rattle her on cross-examination. "Ms. Sinclair," he began, "isn't it true that you were arguing with Mrs. Ashford? That you provoked her by refusing to have your guest move her car?" Amara looked at him, then turned her gaze to the jury. "I was not arguing," she said in a clear, firm voice. "I was refusing to be intimidated. I was refusing to accept that my guest and I had fewer rights than my neighbor. The only provocation that day was Mrs. Ashford's belief that her race and her husband's badge gave her the right to dictate where other people could exist. That is a provocation for which I will never apologize for refusing." The defense collapsed. They had no counter-argument, no evidence to refute the mountain of proof assembled by the prosecution. Garrett and Vivian Ashford did not testify. Their attorneys knew that putting their clients before the jury would be professional suicide. After 3 brief days, the prosecution rested. The jury was sent to deliberate. They returned in less than 45 minutes. The court clerk received the verdict from the foreman. In the case of the state versus Vivian Ashford, on the charge of aggravated assault as a hate crime, how do you find? The foreman cleared his throat and looked directly at Vivian. Guilty. A strangled sob escaped Vivian's lips. Garrett, seated beside her, stared straight ahead with a vacant expression, his face pale and slack. On the charges of conspiracy and filing a false report, how do you find? Guilty. The litany of convictions continued for both defendants. With each pronouncement, Vivian seemed to shrink further into her chair, while Garrett's face remained locked in disbelief. The judge, a formidable man known for his severe demeanor, thanked the jury and then turned his steely gaze upon the defendants for sentencing. Mr. Ashford, the judge began in a voice laced with contempt, you were an officer of the law. You betrayed that trust in the most despicable way possible. You used your power not to protect, but to persecute. You are a disgrace to the uniform you once wore. Because you were complicit and participated in a cover-up, your crimes are serious. However, because you did not commit the physical violence, you will be spared prison. I sentence you to 5 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and a permanent ban from ever working again in law enforcement or private security in this state. Garrett Ashford covered his face with his hands, destroyed. The judge then turned to Vivian. Mrs. Ashford, you were the catalyst for this entire sordid affair. Your heart is poisoned by a racism so deep it led you to physically assault a woman for the sole crime of being your neighbor. You wrapped your hatred in the flag of community standards, but this jury saw it for what it was: pure bigotry. Because you initiated the violence, and because your actions were clearly motivated by racial animus, the court must send a message. I sentence you to 2 years and 6 months in state prison. 2.5 years. A murmur of astonishment ran through the courtroom. Vivian released one final wrenching cry. In addition, the judge continued, the court affirms the civil judgment against you. You will pay Ms. Sinclair $5 million in damages. Take them away. As the marshals led the weeping, shattered couple from the courtroom, one to a life of public shame, the other to a cell. Amara Sinclair stood. She had witnessed the entire process without the slightest display of emotion. She did not smile in triumph. She did not appear relieved. She simply looked resolved. She had not sought vengeance. She had sought justice, and justice, in its slow, exhausting, yet ultimately inexorable way, had been delivered. She turned and walked out of the silent courtroom, leaving behind the wreckage of 2 destroyed lives. The price of hatred had been paid in full. A year has passed since the trial. Spring has returned to Willow Creek Estates, breathing new life into the quiet, carefully tended streets. The dogwoods are heavy with white blossoms, and the air is sweet with the scent of freshly cut grass. The cul-de-sac where the Ashfords once lived is at peace. The memory of the violent raid and the subsequent media circus has faded into the realm of neighborhood legend. The old Ashford house, sold at public auction to satisfy the damages owed to Amara, now has new owners: a young software engineer, his pediatrician wife, and their 2 small children. Their laughter as they play in the front yard is a healing sound, a cleansing of the bitterness that once flooded the property. Amara Sinclair sits on the porch of her house with a glass of iced tea in her hand. She watches the new family play with a soft smile on her lips. Her life is peaceful, a peace she fought for and won. The neighborhood has changed. The horrible incident forced the residents to reflect. The Homeowners Association, under new leadership, has launched a community outreach program. People are kinder, more open. The hard shell of their exclusive bubble has cracked, and a little of the real world, in all its diversity, has been allowed to shine through. Her classic Mustang is parked in the driveway, gleaming under the afternoon sun. Beside it sits a sleek, understated black sedan. Her father, Lucien Sinclair, walks up the path, removing his suit jacket. Today, he is not the imposing attorney general. He is simply a father coming to visit his daughter. He leans down and kisses her forehead. "How was your day?" she asks, handing him her glass of iced tea. "Quiet," he says, taking a sip and sitting in the chair beside her. "Which is always good in my line of work." He looks out at the neighborhood, at the children playing. "It's good to see this place looking so happy." "It is," she nods. "It took a while." I is silent for a moment. "I got a report from the Department of Corrections today." Amara's expression does not change, but she grows still. Vivienne Ashford was denied her first parole hearing. The board cited lack of remorse and multiple disciplinary infractions. Apparently, her attitude hasn't won her any friends inside. She'll serve her full sentence. "And Garrett?" Amara asks quietly. Lucien sighed. "He's working a dead-end retail job 2 towns over. His probation officer says he's compliant, but he's broken. He lost everything. The house, his career, his wife. Everything." Amara was silent for a long time, gazing at the rose bushes she had nursed back to health. They now overflowed with vibrant, fragrant blooms. "I don't take pleasure in their suffering, Dad," she said softly. "But I don't regret the consequences. They built their own prisons long before the state walled them in. A prison of hatred, of fear, of ignorance." "I know," he said, taking her hand. "But what you did mattered. It sent a message that resonated far beyond this street. Captain Donovan's entire command staff was reassigned. Our office completely reorganized the 4th Precinct. Your case became a national training model for identifying and prosecuting hate crimes that disguise themselves as neighborhood disputes." He looked at her with a deep, profound gaze of love and respect. "You didn't just stop 2 bullies, Siri. You changed the system. You took a blow, and in doing so, you exposed a rot that went all the way to the bone. You bled to prove the disease was real." Amara rested her head on his shoulder. The late afternoon sun warmed her skin. She thought of the ugly bruise at her temple, now long faded, a ghost of a memory. The scar was gone, but the lesson remained. True strength does not reside in the power to strike back with equal brutality, but in the discipline to absorb a blow and answer with unshakable principle. It is the serene, unyielding dignity that refuses to be diminished. It is the quiet determination that trusts in the slow, powerful arc of the moral universe, bending inexorably toward justice. She had proven that in the face of intolerance. The most powerful response is not to sink to its level, but to rise so far above it that its ugliness is exposed for all the world to see. And so our story ends. A new day has dawned in Willow Creek, not only for Amara, but for the entire community. What do you think of the sentences handed down? 2.5 years for Vivienne and a ruined career for Garrett. Were they a fair reflection of their crimes? And what does it say about a community when its standards are used as a weapon of exclusion? Share your thoughts in the comments. We value your perspective. If this story of poetic justice and unyielding dignity moved you, please support it by liking and subscribing to the channel for more important stories.